someone spends their time, what they choose to learn, the kind of work they are willing to do, and even the thoughts they keep returning to all, begin influencing the direction their life slowly moves. Each choice may look small by itself, but over time, those choices build on each other in a powerful way. A person might decide to spend an hour improving a skill, reading something useful, or practicing a craft that could eventually create value for others. That decision may not feel important in the moment because it does not immediately produce a visible reward. But when the same decision is repeated day after day, week after week, and year after year, it slowly builds an ability that did not exist before. Another person may decide to spend that same hour in a different way. They might choose the easiest activity available, something that requires no effort and demands no growth. That decision also seems harmless when it happens once. Yet, when that choice becomes a daily habit, it begins shaping the direction of a life just as strongly as the first example. The important thing to understand is that direction rarely announces itself while it is being formed. A person can spend years making decisions that seem insignificant without realizing those choices are slowly building a path that becomes harder to change as time goes on. Life tends to respond to patterns, and those patterns are created through repeated decisions. Think about the difference between planting a seed and ignoring the chance to plant one. When a seed is placed in the soil, nothing appears to happen right away. The ground looks exactly the same as it did before, and someone passing by might assume that nothing important took place. Yet beneath the surface, a process has quietly started. The same idea applies to the decisions someone makes with their time and effort. When a person chooses to learn something useful, practice discipline, or improve their understanding of the world, the results are not always visible right away. The process develops quietly, just like the seed beneath the soil. Months later, the person who kept planting those small decisions begins to notice something different about their life. Their abilities have grown, their understanding has expanded, and opportunities that once seemed far away begin appearing within reach. Those opportunities were not created in a single moment. They were built through many ordinary choices, repeated over time. Meanwhile, another person who believed daily decisions did not matter may find themselves in a very different position. They might look around and wonder why progress seems to happen for others while their own situation has stayed the same. The answer is often found in the accumulation of choices made quietly over many years. Direction does not need dramatic announcements. It simply requires repetition. When someone repeats useful decisions long enough, those choices begin shaping a path that gradually leads toward progress. When unproductive decisions are repeated long enough, they begin shaping a path that leads toward stagnation instead. This is why the small decisions of each day deserve attention. The hour spent improving a skill may not feel important today, but when repeated for several years, it can completely transform a person's abilities. The decision to think constructively about challenges may not change the day immediately, but over time it shapes how someone responds to life. Daily choices also influence what a person begins expecting from themselves. When someone repeatedly chooses actions that move them forward, they slowly develop the belief that progress is normal and possible. That belief encourages more action, which then produces more progress. On the other hand, when someone repeatedly chooses the easiest path available, they may gradually develop the expectation that effort and improvement are unnecessary. Over time, that belief can quietly limit what they attempt and what they believe they are capable of achieving. The direction of a life is not created by accident. It is created through the small decisions that are repeated often enough to become habits. Those habits guide behavior. Behavior shapes results. And results gradually determine the path a life begins to follow. What makes this idea powerful is the realization that every person has the ability to influence those choices. Each day presents opportunities to decide how time will be used, what kind of thinking will be encouraged, and what actions will be taken. While no one can control every circumstance that appears in life, everyone can influence the decisions they make in response. Over time, those responses become the quiet architects of the future. They build skills, shape character, and influence the kinds of results that begin appearing in a person's life. The difference between progress and regret rarely begins with a single dramatic decision. More often it begins with the ordinary choices that seem small while they are being made. A life moves in the direction of the decisions that are repeated most often. When those decisions support growth, responsibility, and improvement, progress slowly becomes visible. When those decisions avoid effort and delay meaningful action, stagnation slowly appears instead. Understanding this principle gives a person something valuable: awareness. The awareness that today's ordinary decisions are not isolated events, but part of a pattern that slowly shapes tomorrow. Once someone recognizes that truth, the small choices of each day begin to feel far more important. Every hour becomes an opportunity to guide the direction of the path ahead. Every decision becomes a seed that will eventually produce some kind of result. Whether those results lead toward progress or regret depends largely on the direction hidden within the choices repeated each day. One of the most common crossroads a person faces in life appears in a very ordinary way. It rarely arrives with a sign announcing that an important decision is being made, and it often feels so small that people hardly notice it while it's happening. The choice is simply this: whether to pursue comfort in the present moment or to pursue growth that may require effort and temporary discomfort. Comfort has a very convincing voice. It promises relief from effort, a break from responsibility, and the satisfaction of staying within familiar limits. It asks very little from someone in the present, and because of that, it often feels like the most reasonable choice available at the time. There is nothing inherently wrong with comfort. Rest is necessary, and every person needs moments when they can recover their strength and enjoy the rewards of their work. The problem begins when comfort becomes the default direction for daily decisions, rather than a short pause between periods of productive effort. Growth speaks in a different voice. It asks for learning, discipline, patience, and sometimes the willingness to struggle with something that does not come easily. The rewards of growth rarely appear right away, which is one reason many people hesitate when this choice appears. Think about someone who decides to learn a new skill. At the beginning, the process can feel awkward and frustrating. Mistakes happen often, progress looks slow, and the person may feel uncomfortable dealing with something they do not yet understand. At that moment, comfort offers a tempting alternative. It suggests stepping away from the difficulty and returning to something easier. It quietly suggests that effort can always begin tomorrow, when conditions feel more convenient and confidence feels stronger. If that suggestion is accepted once or twice, the consequences may seem small. Yet when the same decision is repeated again and again, something important begins to change. The person slowly trains themselves to avoid the very experiences that would have helped their abilities grow. Growth develops when someone stays engaged with the challenge long enough to learn from it. The early discomfort slowly turns into understanding, and what once felt difficult begins to feel manageable. Over time, The person who repeatedly chooses growth begins noticing their capabilities increasing, skills improve, confidence expands, and opportunities that once seemed intimidating start looking achievable. None of this happens because growth suddenly became easy, but because the person chose to continue despite temporary discomfort. Comfort tends to keep someone exactly where they are. It protects the present moment, but often limits what becomes possible later. Growth asks more from the present moment, but it quietly expands what becomes possible in the future. Imagine two people starting at a similar point in life. Both have similar abilities and similar opportunities. One person chooses comfort whenever the decision appears, while the other repeatedly chooses the effort required to improve. In the beginning, their lives may look almost the same. The person choosing comfort enjoys the ease of the present, while the person choosing growth invests time and energy into learning and development. For a while, there may be little visible difference between them, but as the years pass, the results begin separating. The person who chose growth has built knowledge, experience, and capability that did not exist before. The challenges they once struggled with have become skills they can now handle with confidence. Meanwhile, the person who repeatedly chose comfort may find that their abilities have remained mostly unchanged. They might feel confused about why the distance between themselves and others has slowly grown. That separation was not created by a single dramatic moment. It was created by many small situations where someone chose either the ease of comfort or the effort required for growth. Each decision looked minor when it happened, yet together they formed a powerful pattern. Growth also builds confidence in a unique way. When someone repeatedly faces challenges and learns from them, they begin trusting their ability to deal with difficulty. They start believing that unfamiliar situations can be understood and handled with patience and effort. Comfort rarely provides that experience. It encourages someone to stay within familiar territory where little challenge exists. While that may feel safe in the present, it can quietly limit the confidence that comes from overcoming difficulty. There is an important truth hidden in this idea. Growth does not require perfection. A person does not need to succeed every time they attempt something difficult. What matters is the willingness to keep learning and improving through the process. Each time someone chooses growth, they gain experience that becomes valuable later. They learn what works, what does not work, and how to adjust when circumstances change. That knowledge slowly becomes an advantage that shapes future opportunities. The choice between comfort and growth appears many times throughout life. It shows up in small moments when someone must decide whether to learn something new, attempt something difficult, or stay within familiar limits. These moments often pass quietly, yet they carry enormous influence over the direction of a person's development. People who consistently choose growth may not see dramatic changes right away, but eventually they discover that their abilities have expanded far beyond what once seemed possible. Those who consistently choose comfort may enjoy the ease of the present, but later they sometimes realize that the future they hoped for never fully developed. The difference between those outcomes rarely begins with one decision. It begins with the repeated choice between comfort and growth, made quietly in the ordinary moments that shape the direction of a life. Another decision that quietly separates progress from regret is the choice a person makes about the standards they live by. Every person operates according to certain expectations, whether those expectations have been carefully chosen or simply absorbed from the environment around them. These standards influence how someone approaches their work, how they handle responsibility, and how seriously they treat the commitments they make. Standards act like an invisible line that determines what someone will accept from themselves. Some people place that line very low, expecting only minimal effort and average results. Others place that line much higher, expecting discipline, reliability, and steady improvement. Over time, those expectations begin shaping the quality of results that appear in a person's life. Someone who sets low standards may still work hard occasionally, but their effort often depends on their mood or the situation. If conditions are easy, they may perform well. If circumstances become difficult, their effort may quickly decline because their personal expectations do not demand anything greater. On the other hand, a person who lives by stronger standards usually approaches situations differently. Their effort does not depend entirely on convenience or emotion. Instead, their behavior is guided by the level of responsibility they have decided to maintain, regardless of the situation. Consider the person who decides that whatever task they are given will be completed carefully and fully. That person develops a habit of reliability and attention. When others begin noticing that habit, they naturally start trusting that person with greater responsibility. The opposite pattern also appears often. Someone may decide that doing the bare minimum is acceptable in most situations. They complete their responsibilities only enough to avoid criticism, and anything beyond that feels unnecessary. At first, this approach may seem efficient because it requires less effort. Yet over time, the results begin revealing the limits of that decision. When opportunities appear that require greater responsibility, people who have practiced minimal standards are often passed over. The reason is not that they lack ability, but that their past behavior has not shown the reliability others are looking for. Standards influence much more than professional situations. They also shape how someone manages their time, their habits, and their relationships. When a person decides that honesty, discipline, and consistency are non-negotiable parts of their character, those principles begin influencing decisions across every area of life. A person who maintains strong standards eventually becomes known for certain qualities. Others may say that this person can be trusted to finish what they start, prepare carefully, or remain dependable, even when situations become difficult. These reputations are not created through words, but through repeated actions that reflect the standards someone has chosen. Another person may have equal intelligence and ability, but operate with weaker expectations for themselves. They may allow promises to remain unfinished, accept careless work, or delay responsibilities until the last possible moment. Those habits may not appear disastrous at first, but over time they influence how others see their reliability. The world tends to respond to consistent behavior. When someone repeatedly demonstrates strong standards, people begin associating that person with trust and quality. Opportunities often follow people who have built that reputation because others feel confident relying on them. Standards influence how a person sees themselves. When someone consistently lives by disciplined behavior, they develop a sense of self-respect that strengthens their confidence. They know their actions match their intentions, and that alignment creates a strong base for future progress. Here is the other side of the coin. When someone repeatedly accepts lower expectations from themselves, a different internal experience may appear. They may start noticing that their actions do not match the goals they claim to value. Over time, that gap can weaken the confidence that normally comes from knowing one has done their best. One of the remarkable things about standards is that they are mostly voluntary. Circumstances may influence which opportunities appear, but each person ultimately decides the level of effort and responsibility they bring to those opportunities. No external rule can fully determine the personal standards someone chooses to maintain. This means two people placed in identical circumstances can produce very different results simply because their standards differ. One might approach the situation with discipline and preparation, while the other treats the same situation casually. The difference in outcomes often reflects the difference in expectations they set for themselves. Standards reinforce themselves over time. When someone consistently meets higher expectations, they begin attracting situations that require those qualities. Responsibility increases, trust expands, and new opportunities begin appearing. Lower standards can create the opposite effect. If someone repeatedly demonstrates carelessness or inconsistency, fewer opportunities may appear because others hesitate to rely on behavior that seems unpredictable. The key realization is that standards are not permanent conditions assigned at birth. They are decisions that can be raised at any time. Someone who once accepted minimal expectations can choose stronger ones beginning today. Raising personal standards does not require dramatic announcements. It simply requires behaving differently in the ordinary moments when decisions are made. The next task can be completed with greater care. The next responsibility can be handled with stronger discipline. The next promise can be fulfilled with greater reliability. When those actions are repeated consistently, they begin forming a new pattern of behavior. That pattern becomes visible to others, and eventually it becomes part of the reputation a person carries. Progress often follows people who quietly raise the expectations they place on themselves. Regret, on the other hand, often appears when someone realizes they were capable of more, but allowed lower standards to guide their actions for too long. The decision about what standards to live by may appear private and invisible at first. Yet over time, that decision becomes clearly visible through the results it produces. The quality of a person's future often reflects the level of expectations they chose to maintain in the ordinary moments of their life. Another decision that quietly separates progress from regret is the choice between action and delay. This decision appears often throughout life, usually in moments that seem ordinary and easy to overlook. A person recognizes something that should be done, understands that completing the task could improve their situation, and then must decide whether to begin now or postpone the effort. Delay has a way of making itself look reasonable. It rarely appears and openly admits that it is avoidance or neglect. Instead, it usually comes with small explanations that sound perfectly logical at the time. A person might tell themselves they will start tomorrow, next week, or when things feel a little more favorable. At first, this choice seems harmless. Putting something off for a short time does not immediately change the direction of a life. But when delay becomes a habit instead of an occasional exception, something subtle begins happening in the background. Every time someone postpones something important, the mind becomes a little more comfortable with postponing things. What once felt like a temporary delay slowly turns into a familiar response to effort. Over time, the habit of waiting begins replacing the habit of acting. This pattern quietly affects the opportunities that appear in a person's life. Many opportunities do not stay open forever. They appear quietly, present a moment where action could begin and eventually move on if nothing happens. Think about someone who decides they want to improve their abilities in a certain field. The first step might be studying a subject, practicing a skill, or speaking with people who already have experience in that area. None of these steps are beyond the reach of an ordinary person. Yet that person might delay getting started. They may think they need more time before beginning, or that everything must be perfectly prepared before the first step can happen. Weeks pass, then months, and eventually the intention remains while the action never actually begins. Meanwhile, another person with the same interests may simply start. Their early attempts may be imperfect, and they may feel uncertain at times along the way. But their decision to act creates something important that delay never produces: experience. Experience is a powerful teacher. When someone begins taking action, they start learning things that cannot be understood through thinking alone. Mistakes reveal useful information. Successes reveal possibilities. And each step forward slowly improves their understanding. This process builds momentum. The person who acts gains confidence through experience, and that confidence encourages further action. Each step forward makes the next step easier because the person is no longer standing at the beginning. Delay interrupts this process before it can even start. Someone who repeatedly postpones action stays at the starting point, where uncertainty feels the strongest. Because no experience has been gained, the task continues looking harder than it may actually be. Momentum is one of the most valuable forces in personal progress. Once movement begins, it becomes easier to keep going. A person who takes steady action gradually develops a rhythm that allows them to accomplish more than they originally expected. And the habit of action makes effort visible too. When someone begins working toward a goal, other people start noticing what they are doing. That attention can lead to advice, encouragement, or opportunities that may never have appeared otherwise. Delay often prevents those connections from forming. When effort stays hidden inside plans and intentions, the world has very little chance to respond. Ideas remain private thoughts instead of actions that can influence circumstances. Another interesting thing about action is that it often clarifies direction. Many people hesitate because they believe they must see the entire path before starting. In reality, the path usually becomes clear only after the first steps are taken. Someone who acts begins discovering what works and what does not. They adjust their direction based on what they learn and gradually improve their efforts as experience builds. Without action, that discovery never happens. This is why delay can quietly take years from a person's life. It encourages the belief that everything must be perfectly prepared before beginning. Even though most progress comes from imperfect action followed by improvement. The difference between people who move forward and those who remain stuck is often surprisingly small. It is not always talent, intelligence, or resources that determine the outcome. Very often the difference is simply the willingness to begin while the opportunity still exists. Action does not guarantee immediate success, but it does guarantee movement. Movement creates experience, experience builds skill, and skill eventually produces results that would never have appeared without the first step. Delay produces the opposite effect. When someone repeatedly postpones important actions, the conditions that might have supported progress slowly disappear. Opportunities change, circumstances shift, and the moment that once existed eventually passes. The encouraging part of this idea is that the habit of action can be built just like any other habit. A person can start by deciding that when something useful needs to be done, the first step will be taken as soon as it reasonably can be. That choice begins training the mind to respond differently to opportunity. Instead of looking for reasons to wait, the person begins looking for the simplest way to begin. Even a small action can create the movement needed to start momentum. Over time, this habit becomes part of a person's character. Others begin seeing them as someone who takes initiative and follows through on their intentions. Opportunities often move toward people who show that kind of reliability.